Hollywood legend and our late and wonderful monarch had more in common than you possibly would have first thought. As ever, let me explain. Hi, how are you? Nice to see you today, and as ever, thank you so much for joining me. I do love sharing these really exclusive stories with you all about our wonderful Queen Elizabeth because, as I said to you before, what I like about it is there was a very public Queen Elizabeth, and as we're now finding out, there was a private Queen Elizabeth who really did connect with so many people on so many different levels, you know, finding out about the letters that she sent to people, the good wishes behind the scenes, the private phone calls. It's always realising to know, isn't it, that, well, this is really what they did, you know, that we don't know about. And in this very difficult time for His Majesty the King, you know, he too has been thinking of others, reaching out to people who are going into a very similar situation than him. Can you imagine, though, getting a phone call from His Majesty the King? It might sort of put your fears at rest, but if you have to go into a hospital and think, wow, the King's just rang me, you know, what does he know? But you know, the bottom line is, with our wonderful late monarch Queen Elizabeth, she really did connect on so many different levels. In 1954, at the Royal Command film performance in Leicester Square in London, there was a very special event. It was attended by Queen Elizabeth, the Duke of Edinburgh, His Royal Highness Prince Philip, and the beautiful Princess Margaret, and it was a star-studded night. So much so, in fact, that the video, they didn't call them videos then, did they? That the review was voiced by none other than the brilliant actor Jack Hawkins, and his son, his very young son at the time, Nicholas, was honoured to present Her Majesty the Queen with the flower bouquet. Not a bad job, eh? Now, Beau Brummell, as I say, was slightly controversial, simply because of the subject matter. If you know the story, Beau Brummell was in fact born in Downing Street, no less. Yes, and not only that, but was one of the world's first major influencers. You know what an influencer is? We all know that now on this channel, don't we? This is apparently where you look at things on Instagram, social media, and you are influenced to buy them. I know. Are you? I'm not that convinced. But Beau Brummell was indeed something of an influencer. Sadly, his demise was, you know, not necessarily the stuff of great fiction, or indeed film, but starring Elizabeth Taylor and the debonair Stuart Granger, fresh from hits like Scaramouche, well, MGM bosses felt that this was going to be a mega hit, and what better than a Royal Command film performance. In the lineup were dignitaries like, of course, the beautiful Anna Neagle, famous for so many hit movies, alongside Hollywood legend Shelley Winters, and the beautiful Jane Russell, famous, of course, for Howard Hughes's The Outlaw. We all know about that movie, right? But what was interesting to note was, as you can imagine, people were a lot more dignified then, a little bit more respectful, and dressed for the occasion. As I've often said here on the show, it was a big event. It was a Royal Command film performance, the biggest of 1954, and bosses were simply hoping for the very best. But what was interesting, the twist, as I often like to share here on the show, was exactly the communication between, as I say, the beautiful late actress Jane Russell. Now, Jane, of course, had been in many movies, including starring opposite Marilyn Monroe in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and, of course, with My Favourite Spy with Bob Hope, and Gentlemen Marry Brunettes. But, of course, on this particular night, she was over here for a personal matter and was personally invited by the Rank Film Studios. But meeting each other along the lineup, of course, in the lineup to meet Her Majesty the Queen alongside Princess Margaret and the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, they got into conversation. And Jane Russell commented and, you know, said she really liked the gown that she was wearing, Her Majesty the Queen was wearing, which was designed by the royal favourite Norman Hartnell. Now, Norman Hartnell literally designed for everybody at that period. He was the biggest thing in fashion, no two ways about it. So Jane Russell, according to a very well-placed source, was basically stunned to find the day after all the details sent directly from Buckingham Palace from Her Majesty the Queen about exactly where he was positioned and whether she could go along to the showroom for an introduction. Jane promptly went along and was absolutely flattered to find that Norman Hartnell gave her his undivided attention. And it was Norman, who was still looking to break into movies himself, even though he'd had a little bit of success in the 30s and 40s, really felt he'd hit pay dirt with Jane Russell. Now, all thanks to Her Majesty the Queen, Jane did indeed wear Hartnell creations at many various events. Not quite sure if they popped up on movies, but that was all down to simply a chance meeting in a royal lineup in 1954 for a Royal Command performance of the mega movie Beau Brummel. But was it a success? No, it wasn't. Even with all that backup of that Royal Association, Beau Brummel, quite frankly, bombed at the box office. But you can't blame the Queen for that, can you? Neil Sean in the very heart of a rainy Yorkshire.